Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royse. I am a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Marvin Labs use AI and robotics-driven microscope for rapid, mold, and asbestos testing. This is absolutely important to detect harmful spores and toxic molds early. Mold exposure is the leading cause of death for chemo and immunocompromised patients. Let's welcome Jordan Gruber, who is CEO at Marvin Labs, to share his insights with us. Hello, Jordan.
Hi, Daphne. Pleasure to be here.
Please tell us who you are and what is Marvin Labs.
So yeah, my name is Jordan Gruber. I'm actually a robotics engineer by background. As you can hear, I'm an Aussie. I moved into San Francisco Bay Area 2 years ago and brought over Marvin Labs. And so, a little bit about me more. So, I studied robotics, as I said, at the University of Adelaide in Australia. I got to work on some really cool self-driving vehicle type technology. What you'd call an unmanned surface vehicle. So a little boat that could drive itself around and Google Maps, drop points and so forth. This is very early. This was in the 2015 even. I went out and worked in the real world for a little bit in the engineering defense industry, but didn't find that the 9 to 5 didn't really gel with me. I much preferred to be working in chaos than working in structure. So after about a year of that, I quit and I got into consulting and the early stages of what would become Marvin Labs. I stayed in Australia for a few years there. Very formative time for me. That was a informal MBA. In the background, I was going deep on programs like how to start a startup, the Y Combinator type materials. Actually raised capital to start early prototyping. These are first-time angels in my city of Adelaide. If you can call it a city, it was more like a big country town. And working with consultants, contractors across the world, built the precursor prototype to what would become our AI mold testing technology. So that idea, why did I get into that? Well, my older brother is an environmental scientist. And at the time, he'd been working in Australia, working on sites, monitoring for lead and asbestos and mold and these kinds of things. And there was no, what he would have to do is himself sit in front of a microscope and run analyses manually. Skilled work and very, very time consuming as well, very tiring. And a job that people really, really don't want to have to do. So that had him running scatters, and I delved in deeper to that and discovered, hey, this is a problem that affects millions on millions of people, and there are tens of thousands of people who work around this industry in mold, asbestos, and environmental contaminants. So, getting into the early stages, I kind of figured, hey, should really make a go of this. Let's make this a real thing. Let's make it a startup. And in 2020, applied to and was accepted by the UC Berkeley Skydeck program. They have a roughly 1.5% acceptance rate, and applied from Australia and still managed to get into that program. And that really opened my eyes to what's happening around Silicon Valley in the US and allowed me to go full time on the venture. And as soon as I was able, I packed my bags and 2 boxes, got on a plane and flew straight to San Francisco and set up shop. And that was around late 2021. This really has been eye-opening the last 2 years for me. And we refined our tech, we launched it, and now we're running a business around AI for mold and asbestos testing as well, actually.
What a journey you had.
Yeah, it's still going, but it has been a lot of fun.
Please tell us the type of molds and what is toxic mold and what is dangerous of toxic mold to us.
Yeah, so mold, there are tens of thousands of known molds, really, all kinds of species and families and so forth. But some are relatively benign for us, and some are very positive. For example, you might know of penicillium, which penicillin, one of the first very successful treatments for bacterial infections. So then there are, on the other side, there are molds which, like Stachybotrys, which are toxic molds. And these are things that we came to discover, particularly through the late 20th century. As we exposed to these particular molds, they release mycotoxins, which can affect, or, dysregulate our entire, systems in our entire body. From Stachybotrys is well known as it came to where the CDC had noticed a pattern in, unfortunately, young infants who were just dying, and they had no idea why. And it took a large scale study to find out that these infants, and this was in the 80s and 90s, had been exposed to toxic black mold, which is Stachybotrys, in their living environments. And then, of course, if it's powerful enough to kill infants, then it affects everybody. So a lot of people, even though it's not necessarily a mortal problem, it does become something that our bodies just take on, and you feel like you have a constant cold or flu. You're always got a runny nose for some reason, unsure why. Actually, I think it's something like 90% of chronic nasal infections are actually due to mold exposure in the home or office. Um, so something very interesting about these particular molds as well is that they have evolved with us as we've built environments. The kind of molds that you would find out in a forest are going to be very different from the kinds that you're going to find in built environments, like homes and offices and so forth. As an example, you're not going to find a tree. A tree doesn't have as we do, like a piece of drywall with empty cavity space behind it. You won't find that. And the kind of materials that Stachybotrys likes to grow on are the kind of materials that we use in construction. And unfortunately, the problem only seems to be getting worse, particularly spurred by climate change. Climate change, on average, warmer temperatures, more extreme weather events, so storms and things like that. What causes mold to grow in homes, offices is it's water intrusion. So if you have damage to a property, that natural damage from climate change, that water can make its way into these spaces that we don't have access into. You don't have access into the back of your wall. That's where the toxic molds are going to grow without you knowing, but they're going to be sporulating and releasing spores into the environment, making their ways through the cracks in the wall that you're going to be breathing in. And actually, it's very, very common to find during renovation or demolition activities, find large pockets of mold growth, unfortunately, often toxic mold growth that we didn't know about because it's been a place where there's been water intrusion that you haven't seen. Yeah, the real issue here is that these mycotoxins that these molds release, how we metabolize them, really act in a very toxic way on our bodies and affect our health. And we're only really beginning to get to really understand how deeply these molds impact us. The research around mold exposures as it is today is there are so many different species of mold that we're only beginning to understand how they impact our health. Really in the last 5 years. a range that we thought we kind of we didn't know any better. We didn't know it's like smoking and asbestos. We didn't know any better, so we kept thinking it was okay. And a lot of these more common molds we're discovering now actually have really in the last 5 years, genetically, a quarter of people are predisposed to they have a gene which metabolizes mycotoxins released by some of these molds differently to the other 75% of people. And what that means for them is that these mycotoxins can actually build up in their system the same way you'd have like PFAS and things like that build up in your system. These mycotoxins can build up, and it's very difficult for those people, for the quarter population. It can take years after being exposed to toxic mold in the home for that to actually be cleared and properly metabolized out of their system, so carrying toxins with them. But yeah, the research is really shocking. Over the last 5 years, all these different molds that we thought were okay are actually quite dangerous for a lot of us.
Not like asbestos, we probably can locate where in the home. Where can we find most likely for the heating mold in the house, in the building, or in any office structures?
Yeah. So oftentimes, you can see it. You walk into your bathroom and it's quite normal to see mold growing in the corners of the tiles and so on. More often than not, that kind of mold is fairly benign. You can just get in there and clean it yourself. But in other times, it could be behind a wall. You don't see it. You had a leaky pipe, or you had a flaw in the construction of a building, or as I said, climate change that causes damage to the an extreme weather event that causes damage to the building. So in those cases, the only way to really know that it's there is to be able to test the air. So what that means is, more traditionally, you would contact a mold consultant who these people you find on Google. They're small, medium businesses often, or sometimes even franchises, where you call them, they come out to your home or property, your commercial properties included, and they use expensive professional grade air sampling equipment, which basically pulls particles from the air and deposits them onto a little gel. That gel is not a growth medium. We're not looking to grow the mold off of those. It's really just to capture the airborne spores that the mold colonies are releasing. And that sample is not something that a mold consultant traditionally can analyze themselves. It's actually a high skill role where the samples need to be dropped off or couriered to a laboratory where you have a microbiologist who's trained to sit there, look down a microscope, and they're identifying and counting particular mold spores. So there are, as I said, there are many thousands and thousands of mold spores out there. A lot of them look quite similar. So we don't have to actually know the exact type of mold necessarily. Often the family is enough to know, and the families of these molds look similar in that way. So at the end of that, you've got the mold consultant who's gone to the property and taken air samples. Those have gone off to a laboratory for a microbiologist to analyze. And then at the end of it, you get a report that says, okay, based on the air sampling at this property, we captured this amount of air, 100 liters, 200 liters, whatever it is, onto the gel. And on the gel, we were able to count this many of these particular mold spores. So you get a concentration, an airborne concentration of, you have this many thousands of penicillium spores per meter cubed, in that environment. And you don't want high counts of any molds, really. You don't want high counts of any molds. That actually we have a natural defense against mold in those higher concentrations. You'll feel it and you'll sense it. It's that sense of mustiness. You walk into a cave and it's musty. Things like that. You walk into a teenager's basement bedroom and it's musty. They got to wash their dishes or whatever it might be. But in some of these molds in the lower concentrations are still doing you a lot of harm. And so you really want to know from that report which molds are benign. Many actually, in cladosporium, for example, in just about all concentrations is a known allergen. In high concentrations, it's quite bad for all of us. And that's the traditional way that you would monitor for mold and detect it. At that point as well, I will say you've done your air sampling. You may not be able to see where the mold is, but if you get a high concentration of a particular mold spore and you look around and you don't see it growing anywhere, that's where a mold consultant's going to start poking behind the walls and getting lights and cameras in there and even getting there with long swabs and probes to try and find where that mold could be growing, because the air sampling alone won't tell you where it's growing at in that level of detail. It'll say, okay, it's growing somewhere in and around this particular room.
I had a story. I actually went to see a home recently. I can smell those musky air in the house. One side of the wall was all black. It's actually, you don't have to open the wall. The carpet was soaking wet. You can see that was happening for months. And someone's still living in the house. And I feel really bad for them.
Yeah. I mean, they're not sure what they're being exposed to in that situation. And as I said, any high concentrations are not good for us, just point blank. They're just not good for us, particularly for children. Children exposed, young children, prior to the age of more toddler type age, if they're exposed to mold like that in a home for an extended period, they're 3 times more likely to develop chronic asthma by age 7. So even if that weren't a toxic mold, it's still dangerous. It's still dangerous in that sense. But yeah, I hope they manage to get that fixed, figure out where that water is coming from, and dry out those surfaces. At a point, it's time to go, okay, that carpet is gone. You get that piece of wall, that drywall. Drywall is porous. So, if mold takes hold on drywall, without a paint on it, the only thing you can really do at that point is you got to cut it out. You got to take it out of the building and get rid of it. Carpet's the same. Carpet's like a sponge. If you have prolonged mold growth on carpet, there's only mold is many mold species are very hardy. A good mold consultant won't actually say, "Hey, that mold is dead." They'll say it's inactive. It's inactive. Some of these are like the the water bear that can survive in space for months at a time type thing. It's like it dries out and it goes into a state of almost stasis, and then when it's able to access water again, whether it's high humidity or water directly onto that area where the mold colony is, it comes alive again, and that's when it'll start sporulating again and releasing these mold spores into the environment. A little bit of a tangent there, but passionate about this stuff.
Question for you about the mold. Do they have to send us asbestos via biohazard material when they dispose mold?
I think it depends on the mold, on the particular mold. Some are fairly benign. There's not really, so far as I understand, and this can vary by state, I don't believe there's any real regulation about a lot of these molds and how you would treat them. But the professionals who are performing cleaning and remediation, we call it remediation, they're remediating that environment, definitely should be packing this stuff up into Ziploc bags on Ziploc bags, and using the correct chemicals to kill these molds, because the worst thing to happen is you think you have removed the mold successfully, and it just grows back. It just comes back. So very, very important to treat these molds like they are a biohazard, because they are a biohazard, and prevent it from being re-released into the environment after removal.
What are the best practices to keep mold from forming again?
Yeah, so in the times that you can help it, you want to be wary of wetness, high humidity as well. Very high humidity. It depends on the mold here again, but high humidity is great for mold. So if you think you have issues with mold, one of the things you can do is you can dry that environment, run dehumidifiers and things like that. That's often the case when removing molds, is they will run dehumidifiers. If you start to see mold growing, and this is something that general consumers and property owners can do, if you start to see it growing, get it cleaned as soon as possible. You can, in a lot of cases, clean it yourself. If you are concerned about your health, you may want it tested first. And in the case that you can see where it's growing, that's where you can actually buy swabs that you can send to laboratories for a microbiology review. We haven't even got to this, but there's an AI solution for this.
Yeah, let's talk about your products and how does your Marvin air mold monitoring device work?
Yeah, so we have a platform here. We're really about providing a groundbreaking suite of products for not just mold consultants, but businesses who want to be able to DIY monitor for mold and detect it, as well as consumers. So the core foundation of this platform is what we call the Marvin Lens system, and I have one behind me here. So the Marvin Lens is our AI microbiologist. What we've done is we've developed our own robotic microscope hardware here. So you think about a stage where you put your sample, these motors drive that sample around, and then we have cameras and computers on board that capture images of that sample under magnification. So what we end up with is all these images of particulates that we then use machine learning, deep learning, to classify the particles in a way that a human microbiologist would. So that product actually right now, we sell this to mold consultants. We have over a dozen active units out there, and what they're doing in that way is, instead of having to take the samples as a mold consultant, send it to a laboratory microbiologist, they can actually use the system themselves and run analysis on the spot, or take the sample back to their office and run the sample there. The advantage of that, the main advantage, is being able to provide same-day testing results and monitoring results to their clients. Because the alternative, as said, is you have to take these samples and you have to courier them or drop them off at a laboratory where there's a microbiologist. And in many parts of the US right now, to get a same-day analysis from a laboratory can cost you up to $200 for just one sample. A standard home will need 3 to 5 samples. So you can see how quickly that adds up. And the average cost of a home mold consultancy runs $630. That's the national average. Whereas if you're in the Bay Area, you're more likely to pay north of $1,000. And that service, traditionally, you can expect results in anywhere from 3 to 7 days from the traditional process of mold consultants sending their samples to traditional microbiology laboratories. Marvin Labs, run it same day yourself. You have your own in-house AI microbiologist. So that's a key part of our platform that we already sell. Another part of this is, well, how do we take this technology to benefit businesses and consumers directly who are looking to detect and monitor for hidden mold growth themselves? And that's where we got into the, this is the new product. Bear in mind, this is the prototype. The new one's being released in mid-May. But this is Marvin Air. And what Marvin Air does is it is an all-in-one indoor air quality monitor. It has a range of sensors inside of it that help it detect things like PM 2.5 concentration, carbon monoxide, total volatile organic compounds, as well as an optional CO2. It's a battery-operated system. And the unique thing about it is that you can buy devices that do indoor air quality with those sensors I talked about. This is the first that can do mold and do mold properly. It basically miniaturizes the same kind of equipment that professional mold consultants would use, but aimed for consumers and businesses. So this back part on the end is the unique part of that. So if I pull that off, this is essentially a little air sampling device in itself. We have air vents on these sides and a fan on the top. So what happens is air is being pulled through these vents, and it goes through an internal apertures to deposit any airborne particulates onto a little sampling tray. So we have a little sampling tray here, and the sampling tray has a piece of glass with that gel that I talked about previously, the gel that professionals use, so that particles are deposited onto that gel. And that becomes your air sample. And what's very unique about us is that air samples typically are much larger and bulkier. This is an air sample that a professional would use. We call it a cassette. I'd call this a tray. And the benefit of a tray is that you can see how low profile it is. So these can actually go into a letter, and we provide a return letter, drop it in a USPS mailbox. We receive it. Yeah, here we go. Here's one. Small letter that can fit up to 6 of these sample trays on them. So that's more than a standard home would need. And we receive those here in San Francisco, and we run our own little laboratory service as well. So we're actually utilizing the Marvin Lens system in-house to perform analysis of these samples and give you a professional grade mold monitoring report without needing to have a mold consultant come out. So you can see, a mold consultant costing $600 to $1,000. Well, the Marvin Air system, we are accepting pre-orders right now. You can go online and check that out. The link is marvinlabs.ai/air. You can find that in pre-order. But these are $200 right now. And for $200, you get one of these systems and a handful of these sampling trays to be able to do that mold air sampling yourself. So I can see a future where, homeowners, particularly those who are health conscious, worried about, asthma for their kids and so on, or people who move around a lot, into new rentals, this is the perfect system for them. As well as the immunocompromised, toxic mold exposure for the immunocompromised is a real issue. And, oftentimes the things that kill people who are immunocompromised are things that are found in their home, mold inclusive of that. The other would be for real estate and property management on both sides. So for a renter and a tenant, this is a way for them to help their landlord and identify mold issues so that the landlord can come and address that. Because oftentimes, you take a photo of what you think is mold, it may not be mold. If you just take a photo of, your wall, it may or may not be mold. You don't know until you really have a proper test there. And that's what Marvin Air will pick up. The other is on the property management side of things. Often mold grows because of how that space is being used, or if it's being used properly. So simple little things like, say a tenant has been using the bathroom, and as they shower, they're not using the exhaust fan. Things like that. You get a buildup of humidity, and that's where you can have mold growth happening. Or in the kitchen, they're cooking and not using the exhaust fan again, or leaving areas of the property wet. There's a real use case for the Marvin Air where property management can say to tenants, hey, I'm going to give you one of these. You just leave it passively, does its thing in the corner. You have access to all the indoor air quality metrics, your PM 2.5 and your VOCs and carbon dioxide even. You can have access to that, and we actually have an app in development to enable that. That'll be launched before the end of this month. And by the way, we'll come by and pick up one of these samples every couple of weeks, so that we can just run it and make sure that you're not being exposed to mold. I mean, it's a win-win for everyone. We are actively seeking real estate property management to work with on the launch of this product. We're already accepting pre-orders to our website, and we're expecting to deliver the first 100 units of the very new, very fancy looking version of Marvin Air in mid-May. So again, that if you want to look that up, you can go to marvinlabs.ai/air.
How big of area can each Marvin Air device cover, and how long can the device last?
Yeah, great question. So for general indoor air quality, the guidance is roughly every 100 to 150 square foot is where you'll be wanting to monitor indoor air quality. Now, I would say that's similar for Marvin Air. Ideally, you would have this in one in each room of a property. But in the case that you can't do that, well, then there's still value in having one. It hopefully should. It may not. This is the problem, but it hopefully should still be able to collect enough of the sample of air to pick up molds from other rooms as well. But per 100 to 150 square foot is the ideal. In terms of how long these things last, years. It's not a single-use product, though we make it very cost-effective. Because it has those additional indoor air quality sensors. You continue to use those. The thing that is a consumable for these is the sampling tray. So the sampling tray, provide a couple of these, and they can be additional trays can be purchased, and you just take it out and replace it. So that's these are designed for continual use over many years. I'll say as well that it does have a battery on board, so it doesn't necessarily need to be plugged into a wall. And the way that it's designed is to use as little power as possible. So we're yet to test how long these things can last on just one battery charge, but I expect it would be months at a time.
Marvin Air device is a world first do-it-yourself mold monitoring device.
I think so. Yeah.
What other things can your device detect other than mold?
That's a really interesting question, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're collecting airborne particulates, right? And mold spores are one of those particulates. So one thing that has been on the roadmap is pollens, for people who suffer hay fever and things like that, to know what pollens they're being exposed to. I myself, I suffer from hay fever. Funnily enough, I don't suffer from hay fever in the US, but I do suffer from it in Australia. So clearly there's some tree in Australia that has me going, off the hook hay fever that we don't have here in the US. So for hay fever sufferers and asthma sufferers, this could potentially be a way of helping identify what particular things in their environment are causing them to have, more serious asthma symptoms and attacks, and hay fever as well. So that's something we'd look at too. The other thing is that the Marvin Air, the new design actually has expansion slots for additional sensors. So in food and agriculture, oftentimes you want to know if there is formaldehyde, high concentrations of formaldehyde, which for the base Marvin Air unit is not provided. However, with the expansions that we will build, that are quite easy for us to build, frankly, they will have that additional capability that's important for different industries and different applications.
Will your device provide something with a hard wire instead of battery backup in the future?
Yeah, I mean, hardwired is already an option. So these do have if I hold up the station here, these do have a port here. In this case, it's a micro USB, but we're switching out to a USB-C. So you'd be able to plug these in and hardwire them. I'm sure you're thinking about the property management aspect of this, just leaving it. That is absolutely something that we support with the current design.
And what should we do after finding toxic mold with your monitoring device?
Yep. So Marvin Air is essentially your smoke alarm for mold, is the way I like to think of it. At that point, you know that there is toxic mold in that environment, and you can then move on to figure out where it is and what's happening. It could be something in your HVAC, or it could be a water intrusion behind a wall or something like that. At that point, it does help to have a professional come through and determine where that mold is growing. I will say that the mold consulting is quite a traditional industry. Not everyone is necessarily using best practice. So we are actively building a network of trusted and verified mold consultants that we would be able to refer you through for customers on the Marvin Air platform. That is the ultimate next step. Okay, you have the toxic mold somewhere. Let's identify where it is. And then following that, you put together a plan to remediate it, to clean it. That's people coming in suits and masks and the biohazard bags and whatnot to come and really remove that mold for good.
I know it's AI based. Would you able to build something that maybe would detect through the Wi-Fi instead of sending the samples to the laboratory in the future?
Yes, so there are already there's research in using electronic sensors to detect mold. However, they're not specific enough. So they'll tell it's that mustiness. It's a electronic way of going, okay, this is musty, this environment. That's how a lot of those sensors work, and it's quite early research as to like how well they work. The real thing is though, it doesn't give you any idea of what kind of mold that is. So the only real way to do that is you take the mold, the spores, and you put them under the microscope and you identify them that way. There is one other test you can do, which is at least 3 to 5 times more expensive, and that is you can genetic test the mold. But again, we're talking about many species of mold, and a spore of that looks of the penicillium family. There are many different types of penicillium subtypes there. It doesn't really matter the subtype. What matters is the family type. That's how you're going to treat that. The same with Stachy black mold. We don't like to use black mold as a term really anymore because lots of molds are black, but miniaturizing the microscopy element is something that we have definitely considered and we may implement. But the issue then becomes that's a very professional, highly sensitive piece of equipment that has to be maintained, that has to be operated by someone who's trained, and ensuring the quality of result on a system like that, I think would be far too challenging, as well as the actual system would be far too expensive for just about everyone who'd want a real-time mold monitoring. So I think the happy medium is the Marvin Air, and that's where we got to the design of that.
One last question for you. When people sending in those samples to a laboratory, how would they get the replacement piece of device that you put in the Marvin Air? Would
Yep.
they be able to order additional ones?
Yep. So we already have a e-commerce website available. Create an account, and on that website, you'd be able to order more of these trays. And I said the beauty of these trays is that they're so small that you can put them in a letter. So we can just send them in a letter to you, and then you've got enough samples to run for however many Marvin Air units that you have deployed, to make it as easy as possible. It's that's the aim here.
Please tell us where your website is and how can people order a Marvin Air kit?
Yep. So our website, you can go to marvinlabs.ai. That'll take you to our website. And you can pre-order the Marvin Air at marvinlabs.ai/air. For more commercial and distribution, you can contact us directly. Our contact details are right there on the website. We are actively seeking property management and real estate to work with that see the huge benefit that Marvin Air can bring in terms of protecting their assets and their tenants. So definitely reach out about that if you're interested. Something else, just put out there while we have the opportunity is that we are a technology startup based in San Francisco. And so the number one rule of a technology startup is always be raising. We're actually building a business here, but we are actively talking to many investors who are interested in this technology to be part of their portfolio, whether they are a strategic investor, an angel investor, or venture capital even debt providers as well. We have very clear unit economics around this. So if you'd like to know more about potential investment opportunities, you can reach out to me directly. I get email at invest@mvlabs.ai. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I learned so much about toxic mold and mold today. I really appreciate your time.
No worries. Pleasure again, Daphne. And if any further questions for anyone, please go to our website and feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.